Hi, I'm Trish from TrishNewbery.com, PDF Sewing Patterns, and welcome to the Sew-A-Long for Pattern 2132, the apron. This is designed for woven fabrics. So the fabrics we need to think about for this are things like a duck, a craft cotton, drill, twills, cotton canvas, lightweight denims, chambray. I'm sewing today in a linen, and you could also use a heavier woven hemp fibre if you wanted. So this pattern has a lower tier with some gathering on it, so we will be doing some gathering. I'm going to do these as an external gather. You can just do them as a regular gather if you want. So what do we need to know? Our seam allowances are 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. You're going to need a way of finishing the edges, so you could use a zigzag on your regular sewing machine. I'm going to use a serger overlock stitch with 3 threads of colour to match. So not much to say apart from the facing needs a small amount of fuse on it. You could probably skip it and it wouldn't make a huge amount of difference, but let's just jump right in and get started. And before I forget, you'll need to plug in your iron because we're going to be doing a lot of ironing through this construction. So let's start off by working on our facing. So this is our facing piece. It has a notch here and a notch here. So what you'll need to do is apply fuse to the wrong side of it, and then overlock, tidy or zigzag the straight edge without any notches on it. Now you only need 3 threads of colour, and we're just going to use our blade just to tidy up the edge. You don't need to cut anything off. And of course you could either zigzag this or you could just do a narrow hem on that as well. Alright, so just pop that aside and we'll move on. Now because we're at the overlocker, what we're going to do is take our pockets and work on them as well. So here are our pockets. We have 2. If you have directional fabric, you need to cut them out as a pair or 2 mirrors. But for right now, I've cut out 2. And the top edge is the edge with the notch closest to it. So what we want to do is tidy this top edge on the edge only, and you could zigzag that if you wanted to. And do that for the other pocket piece as well. So there's lots of little bits that we have to put together, and all the little bits will come together really fast. Go to your iron, and at the top edge you'll see those notches. So those notches are at the 3 centimetre mark. I'll just pop what that is in inches just below. So what we're going to do is turn that to the wrong side at that notch position and press that into place with your iron. Now we're going to turn in the sides by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and press, and then lastly press up the hem by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. So this is what we want to be left with, and do that for both pieces, and then we'll jump over to our plain sewer. What we're going to do now is to sew this top hem into place. So you can either do this from the wrong side or the right side. I'm going to sew them both, so what that means, I'm going to start off by sewing from the wrong side through the overlocking line in a straight line. There's no need to back tack this. Do that side to side, and now what I'm going to do is turn on over and sew a second line of stitching parallel to the first. Now I'm doing mine at 5mm, which is near enough to 1/4 of an inch. You can do yours at whatever width you'd like, or you don't have to if you don't want to either. So the alternative, so what I did there was I actually opened our ironing up. So if you wanted to do it from the front, if you find that the front of your stitches looks better, that's fine too. Just open that up and make sure you can feel that overlocking line, that serge line, and stitch through that. And then a second line. Some machines do have nicer stitches on one side than the other. Okay, so if you need to, you can go and repress that, but there really shouldn't be any need to do that. So we'll pop those aside and we'll move on to the straps. For our straps we have cut 4. So what we're going to do is match them in pairs, so we have 2 with right sides together, and we're going to sew these together on each side of the long edge at 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. So you will need to back tack. Now we're going to turn these through so that we have wrong sides together. So go ahead and turn the other one through, and then go to your iron and give this a press and make sure that that seam's pushed out all the way to the very edge. Now they're all pressed, it makes it really easy to run an edge stitch. So I'm just going to edge stitch, top stitch the same distance from each side. So I'm going to do that at 5mm, which is near enough to 1/4 of an inch. Now I'm going to run this, and I normally would turn it the other way and sew it the other way, but it's to do with the seam run. If you try and sew the other seam up, you might find that your strap warps a bit, so try and stitch it the same direction. So pick a top and sew down, and then sew the other side top down. So that's just called this the direction we're sewing in it. It'll just stop any puckering or minimise it more than anything else. And it's part of the reason I haven't cut these straps as a fold piece. If it was on the fold, you might find it would stretch worse. And you can see there that that's just a really nice stitched strap. It hasn't got any warping in it, any tunnelling. Gosh, I'm struggling with my words today. Okay, so pop those straps aside somewhere safe and we'll move on. Now we'll work on the ties. So we have 2 of them, and to sew these together what we're going to do is fold them right sides together, and we're going to stitch 1 centimetre seam allowances across here and then down. It doesn't matter which end you start from, and we just need to make sure we leave this shorter straight edge free to turn. So when we get up to this edge, stop the needle down in your work, 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch from the edge, lift the presser foot, turn and pivot, and just rearrange this so it's a straight line, and continue stitching to the end and then back tack. If you have quite bulky fabric, it's a good idea to just trim that corner. All I'm doing is just leaving a small gap there, maybe an eighth of an inch, 3mm, and just cutting on the diagonal just to reduce the bulk. So we're going to turn that through. Okay, so push that point out to the very edge. I shouldn't do this, but that's what I do like to do, is just have nice sharp corners. Okay, so that's pretty good. So I'm going to go to my iron and give that a press with that seam right on the very edge. So when that's pressed, I'm going to top stitch around the 3 sides. Same thing again at 5mm, 1/4 of an inch near enough. So if you don't like the look of top stitching, you can certainly just skip that step. Some people just don't like it, and sometimes your fabric's just not suited for it as well. Okay, and don't forget to repeat that on the other one. Now we're working on the upper part of the apron, so you're going to need the bib facing, and the 2 straps you just created. Alright, so our bib is essentially a rectangle. On one of the long sides you have a centre notch, so that's the bottom, and the other side we have notches in from either end. So this is the top and this is the side that we're going to work with. So what we're going to do is take a strap, and if you've already decided that one side of your strap looks better than the other, that's the side you need to take now. Take a strap and place it right side down to the bib. Take the other strap and place it right side down to the bib. So come to this edge here and you will see a notch from the edge. So what we want to do is place this strap so that the inside edge is on the notch like so. And if you want to, you can hold that in place with a pin. And at the other end, the inside edge sits on that notch. And hold that in place with a pin. So what we should be left with is 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch for our seam allowance there. And now take your facing piece and place that on top. And those same positions should match. You should have a notch in from the edge there that matches, and the same at the other end. Now we're going to sew those together at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. So just remember to take out those pins or reposition them, and just make sure that strap is at right angles. Now we're going to go to our overlocker and edge tidy these sides. Come to your serger, or if you're using a zigzag, you can zigzag. And we just want to edge tidy these shorter sides. Just make sure you don't catch the strap in it. Right, so pull these straps through, or turn them through, and just make sure when you do turn them through that you turn a nice corner. So fold that over and then push it out. So fold that, doesn't matter which way you fold it, I'm going to fold that one away and then push it through. And now we're going to go to our iron. So you're going to need to iron this straight, and then iron these seams we just serged, tidied in by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. So when you iron it, it will look like this, and make sure you can match those edges up perfectly like that. So we need to not only sew across the top, we have to sew down the bottom as well. So I'm going to sew this from the right side. You don't have to, you can sew it from the back if you want. What we're going to do is we are going to sew side to side through the overlocking line here. That's why it's probably easier if you do it from the back. And you want to start as close to the edge as you can and sew a nice straight line, and don't forget to back tack. So I can see the edge of my fabric through the iron mark. And just just make sure when you get to that edge it's all going to be matched up beautifully. So right to the edge and back tack. Right. So now we need to sew these sides down as well. Exactly the same thing. You can sew it through the overlocking from the back or from the front. I'm going to do mine from the front, and I'm going to start right on the edge of that stitching there. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now if you struggle with any of that, you certainly can cut 2 bibs and just create a sandwich with the straps poking out. It's entirely up to you. I personally find that a bit bulky, but you can do that if you want a really nicely lined apron. Alright, so now let's give that a press just to embed those stitches, and we can move on. Now we're working on the waistband. Okay, so we are going to take one of the waistband pieces. It's the one that's going to be on the inside, so you can decide if one's better than the other. So take the one you want to use on the inside and come to the edge that has a double notch in the center. So there's a double notch in the center, and then there's one notch either side, and press a seam up by 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch, and then just put that aside. Now come to the other piece and find that same edge which has got the double notches. We're not working on that side, we want to work on the side opposite. So come up from the double notch, and there's a center notch here. Hopefully that's not too confusing. And then take the bib that you just created, and that raw edge will have a mark in it as well, and that notch will match to there. Okay, so if you've done this right, what you will find is there's a notch here on the edge which will match the starting point for your bib there and the ending point. So all we're going to do right now is just, you don't have to tack stitch this, but I like to tack stitch to hold it in place. I'm just going to tack stitch that in, making sure the center notch matches and our end notch matches as well. Take the waistband that you pressed the hem into and match that to the waistband you tack stitched down earlier. And we want to match that together, so you'll find a notch here to match to that edge there. There's a notch in the center and a notch to match to the other side. I've managed to lose a couple of minutes of video, so instead of unpicking the whole thing, I just thought I'd show you what we've lost. So we've put our piece down with the waistband inside, so the internal waistband with the fold on top. And what you need to do now is to take the strap, and making sure it's not twisted, we're going to sandwich it in between those layers. And you'll know you've got the right place because there are notches to match. There's a notch for the beginning and end of the strap. So when you've got those into place, in the right place, we're just going to stitch that through in a 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So make sure all of these raw edges are even and that the strap's coming out at right angles, so perpendicular. It's our beginning and our end. And then at the other end, same thing. Make sure you bring this strap around, pop it in the area where the notches are, and you'll continue sewing through to the other side. So at this point it's a good idea to just pick it up and just check it's all the correct way, because you don't want to be unpicking this later on. So just make sure that strap's the correct way round before you move on. Let's work on placing our pockets onto the skirt part. So first of all, locate the drill holes, and here I've marked them with an orange, a reddish orange pinhead. Take one of the pockets that you have prepared earlier and make sure the top's at the top. Most important. Okay. So our pattern tells us that our drill holes are marked at 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. What that means is, if we measure a position 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch in and down from the finished edge, so that's folded and folded, you just have to imagine a position there. If you put a pinhead at that spot, then match that pinhead to the pin underneath, that is the position of your pocket, and all you do is you do that for all 4 corners. Now, because fabric is fabric and it's so easy for marks to move, you will find that the position has moved slightly. That's why we have 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. It's sort of a tolerance, so that means if the mark is not in exactly the right place because either the fabric's moved or something's happened when you've been laying that out, it gives you enough room. As long as you cover that drill hole, your pocket will be in the right place. So what are we looking for? Once you have the 4 pins in, you just need to reposition everything until not only is the pocket flat, but you also want to make sure that it's parallel to the edges. Because this is a rectangle, it's really easy. We want the side to be parallel to the side and the bottom to be parallel to the bottom. So it's only a matter now of stitching this pocket down, because we've pre-prepared it all, around the 3 sides, making sure to leave this top side free that has the stitching in it for the hem. So you can do a nice little triangle up and across and down if you want to do that. I'll do it that way, or you could just sew around the 3 edges, remembering to back tack. So if you did want to do a nice pretty triangle to start, we'll turn our work upside down, and we're going to start at the bottommost stitch line. Just make sure everything's flat. So start with the needle on that stitching, and we're going to sew at an angle out. You want to imagine about 6 mil, 1/4 of an inch out from the edge, and we're going to sew directly to that position. Back tack to begin. And when you get to that position, stop with the needle down, lift, turn and pivot, and now we're going to sew just across that 6 mil, 1/4 of an inch. It might be 2 or 3 stitches, won't be much more. We want to stop at an edge stitch position, lift, turn and pivot, and now we're going to edge stitch all the way to the corner at the bottom. Stop with your needle down in the same position at the corner, lift, turn and pivot, and just rearrange your pocket just to make sure it's all nice and flat. And then stitch. Lift, turn and pivot. Now we want to go all the way up to the top edge. Just make sure that that edge is tucked under. And stop with your needle down. Lift, turn and pivot. Now we're going to stitch across that 3 or 4 stitches, whatever you did on the other side, out to 6 mil, 1/4 of an inch, and then stop. And then lift, turn and pivot. And now we're going to stitch at an angle back to that first stitching line. Stop and back tack. And now all we need to do is repeat that on the other pocket. Once you've sewn on both of those pockets, I'm just going to jump ahead and go to our serger just to do some edge tidying, and at the same time we'll work on the frill. Take your skirt piece and we want to overlock tidy 3 edges. So we're not going to do the top, we're just going to do the sides and the bottom. I'm going to show you how to do an external frill. If you're doing a gather, you might just want to change up when you overlock. You might prefer to do that afterwards. So all I'm going to do is just edge tidy the 3 edges, leaving the top free. Now when I overlock, serge tidy the bottom, there are notches. Don't cut the notches off. You'll need to know where they are. You should be able to see them through your overlocking thread. Take your lower frill and locate the edge that does not have any notches on it. We're going to overlock tidy 3 edges, the 2 short edges and the long straight one. Go to your iron and press a hem up on that serged edge at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. So now stitch that hem into place through that overlocking line. So you can either do that from the back of your work, or I like to do mine from the front just so I can control it a little bit easier. So just make sure you stitch through the overlocking line from side to side. So I want to do an exposed gather on the top of my lower gathering panel, my lower ruffle. What I've done is you don't have to do this, you can just do a regular gather, it's fine. If you're doing an exposed gather, first of all, the notches should be marked in chalk. So what I've done to make it easier on myself is where the notches were, I've just put a pin below them so I can see them, but it's not going to interfere with my machine here when I'm doing this. The other thing I've done is I've looked at my manual and done the settings for a narrow hem. It's not a rolled hem, it's just a narrow 3-thread overlock. Basically I've removed the stitch finger and I've changed the stitches, and I've done some testing just to check which one I want until I'm happy with it and all my tensions are fine. So if you do take out your stitch finger, just make sure you put it somewhere safe. So you can do the same thing with a zigzag stitch. So if you want to, you can just do a narrow zigzag through the upper edge. I'm going to do my 3-thread, and all I'm going to do is just do that edge from one side to another in as straight a line as I can. It does use a lot of thread. So I'm actually thrilled with that. I think that's come out beautifully. I'm now going to just put my overlocker back and to my normal settings, and then we can move on. Now I'm going to work on the exposed top gathers. How do I explain this? So if you're sewing regular gathers, you wouldn't have finished this edge with a narrow zigzag or a 3-thread tight overlock like I have, a narrow rolled edge, a narrow edge. You would have either just overlocked it or left it raw to overlock serge later. And then you would be now doing pretty much what I'm going to do. We're going to run a line of gathers 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch away from the edge here. So that's the same no matter what type of gathering you're doing. There's plenty of online tutorials about gathering. Some people like to run 2 rows of stitching close together. I just run one. I'll show you how I do it. You can choose to do it whatever way you'd like. So the main thing I need to think about with gathering, especially with exposed gathering, is we need to lengthen our stitch length from normal. So normal for me is 2.5, and I'm going to up mine to 3. And I'm going to just start making sure I have a really long thread, a long tail, both top and bottom, if I can. I'm going to make sure I start in from the edge. I don't want to have my first stitch close to the edge. It's a real pain. So make sure you start with long tails at the beginning, and we'll have a long tail at the end. And then just stitch nice and straight, making sure to maintain that seam allowance. So here it is, I've marked with chalk my match point. So basically this is just quartered to match to the lower part of the skirt. I've also marked it with a pin just to make it easier for me to see. I'm at the end and I'm going to stop from the end, not go right to the edge. And I'm going to make myself a nice long tail and cut that off. Now because I'm going to stitch this from the top, it's easier for me to pull one thread only at the top, and I'm just going to do a rough draw up now. I'll do a more accurate one later. So I'm just gently going to pull the threads in from one side towards past the first notch towards the centre notch. And it doesn't have to be accurate at all at this stage. Just really to get things started and make sure you've got no threads snapping. Gosh, I'm struggling with my words today. I apologise. I mustn't have had enough sleep last night. Okay, so now I've drawn them up from one side, I'm going to come to the other side. And when we're gathering, make sure you only ever gather the same thread on each side. By that I mean if you gather one from the top, the other one's got to be from the top. And when I say top, I mean the right side of the fabric. So if you choose to gather from the wrong side of your fabric, make sure on the other side you've gathered from the wrong side as well. So treat this very gently, especially if you're only doing one thread of gathering like I am. You don't want it to snap, so good quality thread is also important. Don't force anything. So now we're going to take our skirt part and put this together. Take your skirt and make sure you come to the lower edge, and that's the lower edge that we serge tidied before to finish that edge off. And then take your frill, so we want our lower frill to be right side up and our skirt to be right side up. So we started our gather 1 centimetre in from the edge because that's our seam allowance, and we also, when we stitch it down, want to stitch it 1 centimetre 3/8 in from the edge. So if you're doing a regular gather, you would put this right sides together and sew like that. For this one, we're putting wrong side to right side and stitching it together, and we have to estimate where our stitch line is. So how do we do that? Basically, we want this top one to overlap by 2 centimetres. So what you can do is get some chalk and draw a line at 2 centimetres, which is 3/4 of an inch. And you could just match that edge to the line you've drawn in chalk. I'm going to do it by eye because I've done this before. And the easiest way to start is take this thread and make sure it's to the right, so get it out of the way. Put your stitch length back to normal. Overlap this by 2 centimetres, match that raw edge, and just run a small back tack, making sure it hasn't interfered yet with that gathering thread. So I've secured the beginning here. So what I'm going to do now is just come to the points where the notches would have been, and I'm going to pin those together, and I'm just going to adjust my gathers to suit. So this is where my notches, I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to pin this where my next notch is. And now I'm just going to rearrange my gathers and distribute them nice and evenly between those points. So all I've done is really quarter this hem area off and quarter my gather off and just match the quarter. And then it's just a matter of, I call it eyeballing it. You just have to keep fiddling with it until you are happy with the way that the gathers look. And then making sure we're maintaining that 2 centimetre 3/8 of an inch overlap. We're going to stitch directly on top of that gather line. Because we're stitching in the same colour, there should be no need to move that gather thread, and especially if you've put a line of chalk in, you should find this really straightforward. So up to around about that notch, I'm going to stop just before it, and I'm going to do exactly the same again. I'm going to find my centre notch, and I'm going to match my centre notch positions. I'm overlapping that by 2 centimetres 3/4 of an inch, because that is when I stitch at 1 centimetre, it's a 1 centimetre seam allowance on both sides. And now I'm just going to distribute the gather until it all fits nicely. Sometimes it's handy to do this with long nose tweezers. I just use my thumbnail. So when you are comfortable that that's in the correct position, keep stitching up to the next notch point. I'm really liking that contrast thread I put as my 3-thread narrow. It's looking good. I'm really happy with that. Okay, and we'll just repeat the process till we get to the other side. Okay, so when you get to the other end, just make sure that those seams match up really nicely, and don't forget the back. Oh, that was looking so pretty. Oh, so happy. Okay, so let's move on to the upper part gathers. So what we're going to do now is sew these side seams, hems into place on the skirt. So go to your iron, press this under by 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and we'll sew the hem into place. Here you can see I've pressed those hems into place, so you can stitch them through the overlocking at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, either from the back or the front. I'm going to sew mine from the front. Now you're going to have a lot of threads, so you may as well just trim those off now. I like to trim mine at about 1 inch, a couple of centimetres, and I just tuck that under as I go, so there's no need to secure those edges of the serger thread. All I'm going to do is just tuck them up into that hem, and it just hides it. and I like sewing them from the front so I can see what I'm doing, but certainly it's really easy to stitch these from the back from the wrong side through the overlocking line. So you just take those tails and tuck them under like that. Now this hem here is facing towards the seam is facing towards the hemline. So you can see by stitching it from the front that I can really just get a really nice finish in there. And on the other side we'll do exactly the same thing. So, if you're one of those people that likes to remove the gathering thread, go ahead and do that. That's up to you. Right, so now we're going to just run a standard gathering thread at the top edge, and this is to attach to the waistband. So we do have match points at the quarter position. So there's a notch in the center. There is a notch in the center. There it is there. My pin's fallen out. And I have notches on either side. So these are just quartered off, just like any standard gathering. So I'm going to move those down a bit. So hopefully I'll be able to see them a little bit easier once that's gathered. So just like we did before, make sure there's a nice long tail. Lengthen your stitch length from normal. Start in from the edge. And for this, I'm actually going to start this side of that bulk of that hem on the side seams. So I'll just stitch across in a nice straight line at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. And then a nice long tail. And cut off. Take the bib and place it right side up, and then open the waistband area up like this. So next, take the skirt that you've just gathered and place it right side down on top to match. And now match the notches. So you'll have a notch in the center that matches the center notch on the waistband. You'll have a notch at quarter position. Match the quarter positions, notches, and pin those in place. And then at the beginning, we want this folded edge to sit 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch in from the raw edge. So we want 1 centimetre gap here. So pin that in place, and we want that gap at each end. So just go ahead and pin those positions in at the end as well. Now when we sew it, we just want to sew on top of that gathering line, and we only want to sew through one of the waistbands. So make sure the rest of this and the straps is well out of your way, and that you're not going to catch it when you sew. So just like we did earlier, the easiest way to do this is to just start by sewing a small back tack and making sure that is out of the way of your gathering thread. And then just distribute the gathers evenly by eye. You may need to draw this up, you may need to let this out. So just take your time, distribute those gathers, and then stitch on that gathering line at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. Now there's no need to overlock tidy that edge because this edge is now going to be tucked up into the waistband, but you can if you like. It is a good idea to maybe remove any fraying threads and just tidy it up like that. Okay, so now we're going to need our tie pieces that we prepared earlier. So we want to sandwich this tie in between the waistband. So what you need to do is fold this waistband like so. And what we're looking for is that this seam here is pushed upwards towards the waistband, and that this folded edge is like so. So when you're ready, take this waistband piece and place it inside, and then fold this over. Now there's been a small amount of ease allowed for, just in case you've had troubles with that. So this will be slightly smaller than the area it's allowed for. So just butt that up as close as you can to the seam there and fold it back down on itself. And we're going to now sew that in a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So what we're looking for here is we want our seam to start right on the fold of that side seam hem there. We're just going to sew up to the seam here and back tack. So this is what we're looking for. We want this all to be in a straight line. So when we turn this through, our tie will come out like so. Now do that for the other end, but when you do the other side, make sure, because we have this angle, that you've got the angles opposite each other. So we want the other side to face in like that. You don't want one to be the wrong way round. So let's do the other side. Put that in that seam there, make sure all that bulk is facing upwards towards the waistband. Match those raw edges and stitch a 1 centimetre seam allowance, remembering to back tack at the beginning and the end. So if you need to, you could trim across there. Just going to fold that through so it's nice and sharp, and then we have a tie on one side. Do the same thing on the other, and then just check when you fold them together that they are both facing the same way, which these ones are. Alright, so the last step now is to secure the inside waistband, just to make sure it's all tidy. Okay, so if you like hand stitching, you could hand stitch this fold here to that line of stitching. I don't like hand stitching, so what I'm going to do is pin this in place, and I'm going to do what's called stitch in the ditch. What that means is I'm just going to pin this side so it's ever so slightly overlapping that stitch line, and I like to pin mine from the other side like this, and then I'm going to stitch the waistband into place from the front side of my garment. So I'll go away and pin that, and I'll be right back. So to stitch in the ditch, I'm going to start here at this end of the waistband, and what I'm going to do is stitch right in the area between the waistband and the gathers. And what that's going to do is just catch the waistband underneath, and the stitches will fall into the fold. Now if you don't like doing that, what you can do, because we have got top stitching around most of this garment, is simply do a top stitch around these edges, and that's completely fine as well too. I guess it really comes down to the look you like, I was going to do a stitch in the ditch, but what I'll do is I'll just do an edge stitch. So all I'm going to do is carry on our edge stitch at 5mm, 1/4 inch, and I'll do that at the top and bottom of this waistband. See, I'll show you, it just gives a lovely look to the back. Stitch in the ditch is possibly a better look. It really comes down to how much patience you've got and probably how much time you've got as well. The main thing is that you want to catch the waistband in there, and you want to make sure all the messy edge, the raw edge of that skirt part is in this waistband edge. And I'm just stitching this at 6mm, 5mm, which is close enough to 1/4 inch. As you can see it nicely coming down this end. We'll just match into the top stitching on those straps. If you wanted to secure that seam there, you could also run another set of stitches there, another line of stitches there. But because I've done that on that side of the band, I'm just going to go ahead now and do it on the top side of the band as well. And that will also help the straps. So there we have it, you're finished. Go to your iron, give this a press. Don't press the gathers edge. You don't want to squash those gathers down. We've spent all that time bringing it up. You don't want to flatten them off. Thanks for joining me, and as always, thanks for buying my patterns and supporting a small business. If you like what you see, please hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and I hope to see you again soon, and would love to see your makes on my Facebook pattern discussion group and the links below. See you again soon.